So one of your last article that you published, it's about the need for a new deal. What do you mean by that?
Well, I published it quite a while ago, actually, and it gained a degree of traction. It was not just published in Cassandra Voices, it was also published in Irish Central, which is the leading Irish-American magazine. So it's got a lot of interest. And I understand the impetus behind the question is that in your third printed edition, you're now foregrounding it subject to amendment. I think one needs to understand what the New Deal is and why it's needed now. If we are, in effect, in 2020, at a time similar to the 1930s, in that the unregulated, bare free market of laissez-faire economics has gone completely belly up and destroyed everything in a different kind of context. And what was then in there doesn't exist now. America had leadership in it, the great Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, some people are critical of him. His wife was a total saint. He was a bit of a philanderer, a drinker and a smoker. Who cares? He also had polio, and I think it affected him. Though he came from a background of privilege, he acted in a completely independent way and therefore was the greatest president in American history. And what he did was he told the banks, the Supreme Court, everybody else to go screw themselves. The public-private partnership is necessary. People are dying. The Dust Bowl of America, dramatized by John Steinbeck and the Grapes of Wrath. We need public interventionism to resolve these austerity-driven politics. And that is where we are now. When the Supreme Court of America were blocking his policies, he said, fine, I'll fire you. And when they changed their mind, it became famously known as the switch in time, which saved the 9 justices of the Supreme Court. Now, that led to allegations by the Republican right, as mad then as they are now, even madder, that he was a dictator. Nothing wrong with dictatorship if you're right. Benevolent dictatorship. A difficult concept to embrace because so much dictatorship creates the wrong person.
Okay.
And it's almost impossible to elect a benevolent dictator. Mm-hmm. But he was a bizarre set of circumstances because he came from the position of absolute privilege and absolute elitism. So therefore, as an established blue blood American family, he was to some degree acceptable. His wife was a secular saint. Mm-hmm. And so he was enabled to act in this fashion where what he did was right, but hard. Now, I don't mean right, of course, in the political sense. Now, he adopted Keynesian economics, and John Maynard Keynes is the ghost who's come back. He's the man of the moment again. He's never been discredited. His ideas were as right then as now. Public-private partnership, government has to be responsive, which even the Tory party in Britain are now agreeing to trickle down does not work. There's no such thing as supply-side economics. Milton Friedman was a con man and a shame man. It doesn't work. It's created the cartelization of wealth into 1% of humanity, the destruction of the middle class, the destruction of the working class, and turning the whole world into a plutocracy run by either fascists or corporate fascists or Ayn Rand American-like supermensch lunatics. And that is what has happened. And Keynesianism is the notion that at one level, he's not a socialist. He's been caricatured that way. Everyone who disagrees with people like Mr. Varadkar, Mr. MacDougall in Ireland is a communist, even though they're fascists, if one's involved in the label-slinging business, which I don't want to get involved in. Keynes was a believer in constructive, stabilised capitalism at one level, though he didn't, I think, entirely believe in capitalism. But the notion that we're in a community which even hard liberals would accept of associative levels of responsibility and reciprocal levels of interaction, and that human nature is not conditioned by dog-eat-dog and by the destruction of other people or the treatment of other people in non-Kantian sense of objects of exploitation. Now, that might seem abstruse. What does that mean in practice? What it means is that Greek pensioners should not be allowed to die in the street, that the Tyrrell Stone estate in Dublin should not be liquidated for the interests of Canadian American vulture funds, that people are entitled to, contrary to the American right-wing Republican view, that housing and healthcare rights, the social and economic rights which the West has completely ignored, are matters of right based on our common associative humanity. Now, it is not as if we're all the same. Margaret Thatcher famously says there's no such thing as community, only individuals, borrowing from Hayek and the neoliberals. To some extent I agree, and to some extent I don't. People should be rewarded for their abilities within a system. But it doesn't mean that they should negate their levels of associative responsibilities to others in a sense of community. And community is completely broken down, such that you have lunatics like Steve Bannon, and the man is crazy. The head of Goldman Sachs, or heavily involved with Goldman Sachs, appointed to Trump's cabinet. Now this commissar for fascism, where your government in Italy had the good sense not to allow him to build a monastery for fascism in Italy, ensnared with this idea that he's some sort of superior human being, when all he offers is utter blandishments of hypocrisy and absurdity, but is insanely rich, so he's allowed to get away with his science fiction view of reality, talking about, like a James Bond movie, building cities in the sea for the mega rich, so him and Trump and all their families can go in a compound as they've destroyed the rest of the universe. So what the New Deal is about is the sense that the world order needs recalibration away from the false ideology of neoliberalism, which may have been a good idea in curbing the excesses of socialism, but has led to 1% of humanity controlling all the wealth, governmental autarky and sovereignty being controlled by corporations, and the disempowerment of people and the destruction of lives, livelihoods, homelessness, healthcare rights, and a lack of an archaeology of knowledge of where people are in short-term contracts with no layers of security and with no ability to build cohesive family or relationship-driven structures. And a bit like James Agee, let us not forget, or let us now praise famous men, or John Steinbeck, we need to look at the interests of the Okies and the Dust Bowlers and the ordinary blue-collar people, who are increasingly working class and middle class. But of course the problem becomes, in an educationally dysfunctional universe, these people vote against their interests. So Trump successfully appealed to blue-collar America through Cambridge Analytica and Steve Bannon. With the result, they voted entirely against their interests. The subprime mortgage scandal which dispossessed them is not rectified. The banks are bailed out for their criminality. Goldman Sachs are part of the Trump administration, as indeed they were part of the Obama administration. Let's not leave Obama out of this. He is part of the decline. He may be an intelligent part of the decline, but he's part of the decline. And the ordinary working class people votes against, or middle class, their interests, their own collective self-destruction. And Obama's legacy, such as what it was, has gone in two strokes of Donald Trump's pen, including the Kyoto Accord and signing up for the environmental considerations. And I think it's very important when we deal with this notion, which several people have written about an age of extremes, what needs to be, which was the impetus behind my public intellectual series in Cassandra Voices, which I think is now in issue 8, and there are 44 or 5 more to come before they close you down or they close me down, is in an age of extremes, one has to understand two things. One has to understand what is an extreme and what is not an extreme, and what is the alternative. And of course, to quote the Thatcherites and Margaret Thatcher again, there is no alternative. Well, yes, there is. So let's look at false extremes and real extremes. For example, people associate extremism with, for example, extreme Islamic fundamentalism. That is true. No one condones beheading. No one condones terrorism. Perhaps one should understand what has bred the level of resentment which caused that in the first place. But more extreme than the Islamic fundamentalists or the Christian fundamentalists in America, Chomsky called the Republican Party of America, and I agree entirely, the most dangerous organization in human history. When they came back to Chomsky and they said to him, you might cut that. When they came back to Chomsky and they said to him, well, were you misquoted? He said, no. It's the most important public intellectual on earth. And the reason he says, which I entirely agree with, the triad of evil. And Ireland is like the ultimate example of this. Three vectors of human, unadulterated Dostoevskian evil. Alyosha-like evil. Stavrogin-like evil. Evil beyond all description. Neoliberalism gone mad. Money for the pursuit of money. Post-truth and falsification, and this whole nasty religious fundamentalism which the Christian Bible Belt have, which ties into their obscure and ludicrous veneration of family values. They don't care about the quality of children's education or upbringing. They just want them indoctrinated to be supplicant pliant workers for their interests. That's all they want. They don't care about intellect, they want indoctrination. And they don't care about the poor or decent people. It's almost like the Catholic Church. I represent a woman called Carmel Doyle in Ireland, who gave a famous video in the 60s where she recited Bible stories. The church found it in a garbage bag, turned it into an Oscar-nominated film and a CD called Give Up Your Old Sins, where she recites as a 5-year-old all these stories. Did they pay her a penny? No. If I had intervened, they wouldn't. And there's no distinction between the tridentine mass lunatics who operate the Irish bench, the Catholic fundamentalists, the Christian fundamentalists. Being Italian, you'd understand the close association, for example, between somebody like Mr. Andreotti, a Christian Democrat, and his close association with the mafia. And the Fine Gael party in Ireland are a classic example of someone masquerading as a social democrat Christian party, but in reality deeply fascist. And fascist by virtue of their association with corporate interests and corruption, and the pliancy of those, and a limited level of social justice, which was there historically, but is now. Now, that led to this sense of the New Deal. I wrote the article kind of in a fit of cri de coeur, and it was taken up by various people because I think it's tapped into a zeitgeist, which is why, in all sort of way, 1 year later, Frank has decided he's going to go with it with modifications. But in the interim, I think I deepened thought process arising from that. If you wish, I'll expand on them.